The dog ran straight into the blizzard, ignoring every command. 3 minutes later, a retired SWAT found a woman bleeding at his fence, but what was sewn inside her jacket was the reason someone was already hunting them. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. We're so curious about it, and if this story touches your heart, please make sure to subscribe for more. Your support truly means the world. The storm arrived without warning, swallowing the mountains in white and silence, turning the night into something heavy, pressing against the walls of a small, isolated cabin at the edge of Wyoming wilderness. Jack Reynolds had learned long ago that winter did not announce itself. It tested you when you least expected it. At 62, Jack moved slower than he once had, but the habits drilled into him over 3 decades of law enforcement never truly faded. He was a retired SWAT officer, tall even in age, his frame still broad though weathered, with shoulders that carried the memory of old armor and door breaches. His hair, once jet black, had gone steel gray, cropped short not out of vanity but habit, and a neatly trimmed beard framed a face carved by wind, sun, and too many nights without sleep. His eyes were pale blue, sharp but tired, the kind that had seen too much and learned to look away only when absolutely necessary. Jack lived alone by choice, though he told himself it was convenience. The truth was quieter and heavier. Solitude kept the noise down. The memories stayed manageable when there was no one around to notice when his hands trembled or when his breathing hitched for no visible reason. The cabin reflected him, functional, sparse, and stubbornly standing against the elements. Logs darkened with age, a stone fireplace built by his grandfather, and furniture chosen for durability rather than comfort. The only warmth in the room came from the low crackle of the fire and the presence of Duke. Duke was a 6-year-old German shepherd, large even for his breed, with a thick black and tan coat that had grown heavier with winter. His chest was broad, his legs powerful, built for endurance rather than speed, and his dark brown eyes carried an intelligence that felt almost unsettling to strangers. Duke was not a pet in the traditional sense. He was trained, disciplined, and deeply bonded to Jack, a service dog in practice if not on paper. Years earlier, after Jack's final operation went wrong and left him with a shattered shoulder and a head full of ghosts, Duke had become the one constant that could pull him back from the edge of his own mind. Duke sensed the changes Jack himself sometimes missed, the tightening jaw, the shallow breath, the storm building behind his eyes. That night, Jack sat in his worn leather chair, staring at the fire without really seeing it, his left shoulder aching in that familiar way that warned him a weather shift was coming. The pain was not sharp. It was a dull reminder, a quiet echo of violence past. He had learned to live with it, the same way he had learned to live with the images that surfaced uninvited when the world went too quiet. Duke lay at his feet, alert but still, ears twitching occasionally as the wind rattled the cabin. Then the stillness broke. Duke lifted his head sharply, muscles tensing, a low sound vibrating in his chest. Jack noticed immediately. Duke did not bark without reason. Not ever. The dog rose to his feet, nails clicking softly on the wooden floor, and moved toward the door with purpose. "Easy," Jack murmured, his voice rough from disuse. Duke ignored him. The bark that followed was not loud, but it was urgent, edged with something Jack recognized instantly: panic. Duke lunged at the door, barking again, harder this time, and before Jack could reach him, the dog had already nudged the latch loose and forced it open. Cold air tore into the cabin like a living thing, carrying snow and the sharp scent of ice. Duke bolted into the storm, Jack froze for half a second, every instinct screaming at him that this was wrong. Duke never disobeyed, never ran blind into danger. Jack grabbed his coat and flashlight, jamming a wool hat onto his head as he stepped into the blizzard. The wind hit him full force, stealing his breath, snow stinging his face like grit. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. He could barely see 10 feet ahead, but Duke's shape cut through the white, moving fast and sure, driven by something Jack could not yet see. "Duke!" he shouted, though the wind swallowed the sound whole. He pushed forward, boots sinking deep into fresh drifts, his shoulders screaming in protest as he fought to keep his balance. Every step felt heavier than the last, but he kept going, driven by the same instinct that had once sent him charging into gunfire for strangers he would never meet again. Duke stopped suddenly near the southern fence line, barking sharply and circling one spot. Jack's flashlight beam swung wildly before settling on a shape crumpled against the wire. For a split second, his mind refused to process it. Then the light caught a face. A woman lay half buried in snow, her dark hair matted and stiff with ice, her skin pale against the blood staining her jacket. She was young, early 30s maybe, with sharp cheekbones and a slender build that looked fragile in the brutal cold. Her skin was olive-toned, lips tinged blue, lashes dark against closed eyes. She wore clothes utterly wrong for the weather, a thin canvas jacket, fitted jeans, running shoes now soaked and useless. Jack dropped to his knees beside her without hesitation, his training taking over. He pressed gloved fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. Faint, irregular, but there. Alive, barely. Duke whined softly, pressing close, his body angled between the woman and the darkness beyond the fence, as if daring whatever had brought her there to come back. Jack scanned the area instinctively, heart pounding, senses stretched thin. There were no obvious tracks beyond the chaotic sweep of the storm, no sounds except the wind. Still, a cold knot formed in his gut. This didn't feel like an accident. He lifted the woman carefully, surprised by how light she was, and turned back toward the cabin. The walk back felt longer, the wind harsher, but Jack did not stop. Inside, he laid her on the rug by the fire, peeling off his gloves to check her wounds. Blood seeped from a gash along her side, ugly but not immediately fatal. He worked quickly, efficiently, cleaning and bandaging with supplies he kept out of habit more than expectation. As he cut away the torn fabric of her jacket, his fingers brushed against something hard sewn into the lining. Jack paused. Slowly, he reached inside and pulled it free. A small black device blinked faintly, a steady green light pulsing in the dim cabin. A tracker. Jack stared at it for a long moment, the weight of understanding settling over him. He looked from the device to the unconscious woman, and then to Duke, who met his gaze without blinking. Jack exhaled slowly. He had seen this before, in other places, under other skies. People didn't collapse bleeding in a blizzard with a tracker sewn into their clothes by coincidence. Whatever had brought her to his fence was not finished. And for the first time in years, Jack Reynolds felt the unmistakable pull of something he thought he had left behind. This was not just a rescue, it was the beginning of a hunt. Jack worked in silence, the way he always had when things turned serious. The cabin was dim now, lit only by the fire, and a single oil lamp he set on the table, its flame flickering whenever the wind found a weakness in the walls. Outside, the blizzard pressed in harder, snow hammering the windows with a dull, relentless rhythm. The woman lay on the rug where Jack had placed her, wrapped in one of his heavy wool blankets, her breathing shallow but steadier than before. Up close, she looked younger than he had first thought. early 30s, maybe younger. Her face was angular but soft, with a faint scar near her right eyebrow that suggested a life lived alert rather than sheltered. Her hair was dark brown, nearly black, cut just past her shoulders in a practical, uneven style that told Jack she wasn't someone who spent much time in front of mirrors. Her skin held an olive tone, pale now from blood loss and cold, and her hands, long-fingered with faint calluses, did not belong to someone unfamiliar with stress. Jack had seen hands like that before. People who lived with tension carried it everywhere. Duke lay a few feet away, body rigid, head lifted, eyes never leaving the woman. He hadn't relaxed since they came back inside. Jack noticed that too. Duke trusted his instincts more than anything else, and right now, those instincts said danger wasn't finished. Jack finished cleaning the wound along the woman's side and secured the bandage. As he adjusted the blanket, the weight of the small device in his palm felt heavier than it should have. The tracker. He turned it over slowly, watching the faint green pulse blink back at him, steady and patient, as if it had all the time in the world. "What the hell did you get yourself into?" he muttered, though he wasn't sure if he was speaking to the woman or to himself. He crossed the room and set the tracker on the table, then pulled the battery free with a practiced twist. The light died instantly. Duke let out a low sound, almost a warning, and Jack glanced toward the windows. The wind shifted. A second later, the lights flickered once and went out completely. The fire remained, but the hum of the old generator outside died with a cough, and then nothing. Jack stood still, listening. Silence settled in, thick and wrong. He reached for his phone out of habit, already knowing what he would see. No signal. He checked the landline mounted on the wall near the kitchen. Dead. "Power's gone," he said quietly, more to Duke than anyone else. "And so is the line." Duke rose and moved closer to Jack's side, his posture protective. The woman stirred then, a soft sound escaping her lips as her eyes fluttered open. She winced, one hand clutching the blanket. Jack knelt beside her, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Easy," he said. "You're safe. For now." Her eyes focused on him, sharp despite the pain. They were striking hazel, flecked with gold, and they studied his face with quick intelligence rather than fear. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice rough, controlled. "My cabin," Jack replied. "You collapsed by my fence." She swallowed, jaw tightening. "My jacket," she said immediately. "Where is it?" Jack didn't answer right away. He held her gaze instead, letting the moment stretch. He had learned long ago that silence made people reveal more than words ever did. "It's drying," he said finally. "You were bleeding." She nodded once, accepting that, but her eyes flicked past him toward the table where the tracker sat, its casing now dark. Jack followed her gaze. "Name?" he asked. "Maya," she said after a brief hesitation. "Maya Carter." She shifted slightly, grimacing. "You found it, didn't you?" Jack didn't pretend ignorance. "I did." He picked up the tracker and held it where she could see it. "This isn't something hikers carry around by accident." Maya closed her eyes for a second, as if gathering strength. When she opened them again, there is resolve there, layered over exhaustion. "I didn't put it there," she said, "but I know why it's there." Before Jack could respond, Duke's head snapped toward the door. A low growl rolled out of his chest, deeper than before, vibrating through the room. Jack felt the hairs on his arms rise. He stood slowly, hand drifting toward the heavy flashlight on the counter. "Stay," he murmured to Maya, though he doubted she would move anyway. The knock came then, 3 firm raps on the door, measured and calm, almost polite. Jack didn't move. Duke took a step forward, growling louder now, teeth bared. Jack placed a hand on the dog's shoulder, feeling the tension coiled there. "Easy," he whispered. The knock came again. Jack approached the door, boots quiet on the floor, and looked through the small window beside it. A man stood on the porch, snow clinging to his coat, posture relaxed despite the storm. He was in his mid-40s maybe, tall and lean, with sharp cheekbones and a clean-shaven face that belonged in an office more than the wilderness. His hair was dark, neatly styled, untouched by the wind, as if he had stepped out of a different world entirely. His eyes, pale gray and alert, scanned the door with professional patience. Jack cracked the door open just enough to speak, keeping his body angled to block the view inside. "Can I help you?" The man smiled, an easy, practiced expression that never reached his eyes. "Evening," he said. His voice was smooth, controlled. "Sorry to bother you in this weather. I'm looking for a colleague who may have gotten lost out here." Jack said nothing. The man continued, nodding toward the storm. "Young woman, dark hair, might be injured." Duke growled louder behind Jack, a sound that made the man's eyes flick briefly past Jack's shoulder. "I haven't seen anyone," Jack replied evenly. The man's gaze shifted subtly to the side of the cabin, then to the darkened power lines stretching into the trees. "Rough night for utilities," he said lightly. "Storms like this tend to knock things out." Jack felt the confirmation settle in his gut. This man knew. The smile tightened just a fraction. "If you do happen to see her," the man added, "I'd appreciate a call." Jack stared at him for a long moment, then closed the door without another word. He slid the deadbolt into place as Duke continued to growl, pacing once before returning to Jack's side. From the other side of the door, the wind swallowed any remaining sound. Jack turned slowly and looked at Maya. She had pushed herself up on one elbow, her face pale but her expression clear. "They're here," she said quietly. Jack nodded once. "Yeah," he replied. "They are." He glanced at the tracker on the table, then at Duke, who met his gaze without hesitation. For the first time in years, Jack felt the unmistakable tightening in his chest that meant the world had shifted. The quiet life he had built for himself was over. Whatever Maya Carter had brought to his fence had already found him, and this time there would be no hiding. The silence after the knock was heavier than the storm itself. Jack stood motionless for several seconds after sliding the deadbolt home, his palm resting flat against the wood as if he could feel the man's presence through it. Outside, the wind howled and swallowed the retreating footsteps, but Jack knew better than to believe the danger had passed. Men like that didn't knock once and leave. They measured. They waited. He turned slowly, every sense tuned sharp in a way he hadn't felt in years. Maya was sitting upright now, her back against the couch, blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The pain was still there. He could see it in the tension of her jaw and the careful way she breathed, but fear had been replaced by calculation. That told Jack more about her than any explanation could. "How many?" he asked quietly. Maya didn't hesitate. "At least 3, she said. Her voice was steady, low. "One talks, one watches, one stays invisible." Jack nodded once. That matched his own read. Duke moved to the center of the room, standing squarely between Maya and the hallway, his body angled toward the windows. His ears were high, his muscles rigid, tail low. This was not a dog waiting for commands. This was a sentry. Jack moved to the window overlooking the tree line and pulled the curtain back just enough to peer through a narrow gap. The flashlight beam from earlier was gone now, but the snow reflected enough ambient light to reveal faint shadows between the pines. Nothing obvious. That worried him more than clear movement would have. They cut the power, Maya said. That wasn't the storm. Jack glanced at the breaker panel mounted near the kitchen. He already knew. Still, he opened it and checked. Everything was thrown, cleanly, no surge damage, no burn marks. Line 2, he said. They didn't want noise. Maya swallowed. They don't want witnesses. Jack felt the words settle into place like a locking mechanism in his chest. He crossed the room and reached into the closet at the end of the hall, pulling out a long, narrow case coated in dust. When he opened it, the smell of oil and old steel filled the air. Inside lay a bolt-action hunting rifle, heavy and simple, the kind that did one job well and didn't ask questions. He checked the chamber, then the scope, his movements economical despite the stiffness in his shoulder. "You expecting a gunfight?" Maya asked. "No," Jack replied. "I'm expecting patience." Duke let out a low rumble as Jack moved toward the back door. The sound stopped him. He crouched and placed a hand on Duke's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the thick fur. "What do you see, boy?" he murmured. Duke's eyes were fixed not on the door, but upward toward the ridge beyond the trees. Jack followed the line of that gaze and felt the cold realization slide into place. High ground. Jack grabbed the binoculars hanging by the window and stepped into the narrow mudroom, cracking the back door just enough to look out. The wind tore at it immediately, forcing him to brace his weight against the frame. He raised the binoculars and scanned the ridgeline, moving slow, methodical. At first, there was nothing but rock and snow. Then, he saw it. A flicker, brief, almost nothing, a reflection that didn't belong. He lowered the binoculars. "Sniper," he said flatly. Maya's face went pale. "You're sure?" "I'm sure enough," Jack replied. He shut the door and secured it, then moved quickly, pulling furniture away from the windows and angling the heavy oak bookshelf to block the largest pane of glass. Duke stayed glued to his side, mirroring his movements. Maya tried to stand and failed, her legs trembling beneath her. Jack caught her elbow before she hit the floor. "Easy," he said. "You're not running anywhere." "Neither are you," she shot back. Jack met her eyes. There was anger there now, sharpened by fear. "What did you bring here?" he asked. Maya hesitated, then reached weakly toward the jacket draped over a chair. "In the lining," she said. Jack retrieved it and found a small waterproof pouch sewn deeper inside, beneath the tracker's former place. Inside was a compact flash drive, scuffed and worn. "That," Maya said, "is why they're here." Jack weighed it in his palm. "What's on it?" Maya exhaled slowly. "Proof," she said. "Financial records, environmental reports, payments routed through shell companies." She looked at him steadily. "Enough to put people in prison." Jack felt the old instinct stir, the part of him that assessed risk not in words but in odds. "You were planning to take this where?" "A journalist," she replied. "Meeting got compromised." Duke growled again, sharper this time. Jack snapped his head toward the ceiling just as something thudded softly against the side of the cabin. Snow slid from the roof. Jack froze. Then came the faintest sound of all, a whisper of movement beneath the floor. "Basement," he said. He gestured to Maya. "Stay here. Don't move." He took 2 silent steps toward the kitchen, each foot placed with care. Duke moved with him, body low. Jack reached the basement door and pressed his ear against it. Nothing. He counted to 3, then opened it fast and stepped aside. A figure stumbled up the stairs, caught off balance by the sudden light. The man was young, late 20s at most, slim build, dressed in dark tactical clothing that fit too well to be coincidence. His face was narrow, almost boyish beneath a dusting of stubble, eyes wide with surprise. He carried a compact tool bag slung over one shoulder. Jack didn't hesitate. He drove his shoulder into the man's chest and sent him crashing backward into the wall. The fight was over in seconds. Jack pinned him to the floor, knee planted firmly, wrenching the man's arm behind his back. The intruder gasped, panic flooding his face. Duke stood inches away, teeth bared, growling low. "How many?" Jack demanded. The man shook his head, breathing hard. "I'm just the tech," he stammered. "I don't know." Jack twisted his arm a fraction more. "Wrong answer." "3!" the man shouted. "2 outside. 1 on the ridge." Jack released him and bound his hands with zip ties pulled from a drawer, dragging him into the pantry and locking the door. He turned back toward the living room, heart pounding, mind already racing ahead. Maya stared at him, shaken but intact. "They're closing in," she said. Jack nodded. "Which means we don't stay put." Duke met his gaze, tail stiff. Jack crouched and rested his forehead briefly against the dog's. "We're moving uphill," he whispered. Outside, the wind screamed louder, as if the mountain itself were warning them. Jack straightened, gripping the flash drive in one hand. The storm was no longer just cover, it was a deadline, and the clock had started ticking. The climb began in silence, broken only by the wind and the steady crunch of snow beneath their boots. Jack moved first, keeping low, his shoulders hunched against the gale, every step measured despite the fire burning through his injured shoulder. The ridge loomed ahead like a dark spine cutting through the white chaos. Duke stayed close, never ahead now, his body brushing Jack's leg as if to remind him that he wasn't alone. Maya followed several steps behind, slower, favoring her injured side, her face tight with pain but her eyes locked forward with grim determination. The storm did not ease as they climbed. If anything, it seemed to sense their urgency and push back harder. Snow whipped sideways, stinging exposed skin, filling Jack's mouth with the taste of ice. His lungs burned, each breath shallow and sharp. This wasn't a sprint. It was endurance, the kind that stripped a person down to what they truly were. Halfway up, Jack stopped and crouched behind a cluster of rocks, scanning the slope below. The cabin was already half hidden by blowing snow, its outline dissolving into the storm. Somewhere beyond it, men were moving, waiting for the moment when he made a mistake. Jack pressed his palm flat against the snow to steady the tremor in his hand. Age had slowed him, but it had also taught him something younger men never learned soon enough. Patience kept you alive longer than strength. Duke's ears flicked suddenly, his head snapping toward the ridgeline above them. Jack followed the motion instinctively. Nothing. No sound, no movement, and that was the problem. "He's close," Jack muttered. Maya looked at him, fear flickering across her face. "The sniper?" Jack nodded once. "He's already got us." They reached the crest just as the wind shifted again, thinning for a brief, merciful second. Jack dropped to one knee and pulled the satellite phone from his pack, fingers clumsy in the cold. The device was old, military-grade, its casing scarred from years of neglect. He powered it on and waited. The screen flickered, searching. Duke stood directly in front of him now, body squared toward the open slope, eyes fixed on something Jack still couldn't see. Maya sank down behind a boulder, clutching the flash drive to her chest as if it were a lifeline. "Come on," Jack whispered to the phone. The signal bars jumped once, then steadied. Weak, but there. Jack connected the drive and began the upload, watching the percentage crawl upward at a painfully slow pace. 10%, 15. The ridge felt exposed, stripped bare by wind, nowhere to hide if things went wrong. Duke's growl came low and fast, vibrating through his chest. Jack's heart slammed. He knew that sound. Duke wasn't reacting to fear. He was reacting to intent. The shot came without warning. There was no crack, no echo, just a violent impact that seemed to tear the air itself apart. Duke moved first. He launched himself sideways with a force that slammed into Jack's shoulder, knocking him off balance. Jack hit the snow hard, pain exploding through his arm as something hot ripped across his upper back. For a moment, the world went white. Then the pain arrived in full, a searing line that stole his breath and left his vision swimming. Duke was on top of him, barking furiously into the storm, teeth bared toward the ridge. Jack gasped, rolling onto his side. Blood soaked into the snow beneath him, steaming faintly in the freezing air. "Duke!" he rasped. "Down!" The dog hesitated, then dropped beside him, body still tense, ready to spring again. Jack forced himself up onto one elbow and looked at the phone lying inches from his hand. The screen still glowed. Upload 87%. "Almost," he muttered through clenched teeth. Maya screamed his name, scrambling toward him despite his shouted command to stay back. Another shot cracked through the storm, striking rock where Jack's head had been seconds earlier. Shards of stone sprayed the snow. Duke surged forward again, placing himself squarely between Jack and the unseen shooter, his broad body a living shield. "No!" Jack shouted, grabbing for the dog's collar. But Duke didn't retreat. He planted himself there, teeth bared, daring death to try again. The third shot came lower. Duke yelped as the force caught him across the ribs, spinning him sideways into the snow. Jack's heart stopped. "Duke!" He crawled forward, ignoring the agony tearing through his shoulder, dragging himself to where the dog lay. Duke struggled to rise, one leg trembling, breath coming in short, pained bursts. Blood darkened the snow beneath his side. Jack's hands shook as he pressed against the wound, tears freezing on his lashes before they could fall. "Good boy," he whispered, voice breaking. "You did good." The phone chimed softly. Upload complete. Jack snatched it up and hit send again, forcing the transmission through as the signal wavered. "Go!" he snarled into the device, not caring who heard. Then the screen went dark. The connection died. Jack didn't care anymore. He slung the rifle over his good shoulder, hooked an arm under Duke's chest, and dragged the heavy dog backward behind the rocks. Maya was there instantly, her hands slick with blood as she helped pull Duke into cover. "He saved you," she said, her voice shaking. Jack nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. He pressed his forehead against Duke's for a brief moment, breathing in the familiar scent of fur and snow. "I'm not done," Jack whispered. "Not yet." Below them, the storm howled louder, swallowing the ridge in white. Somewhere out there, the sniper waited, unaware that the thing he'd been sent to stop had already slipped through his fingers. Jack tightened his grip on the rifle and looked down the slope toward the cabin, eyes burning with resolve. The storm had taken its payment. Now it was Jack's turn to finish this. Dawn did not arrive gently. It clawed its way through the thinning storm, turning the sky from iron gray to a pale, uncertain blue. Jack felt the change before he saw it, a subtle shift in the wind, a loosening of the pressure that had wrapped around his chest all night. He sat with his back against the rock face, rifle resting across his knees, his wounded shoulder stiff and burning. Duke lay pressed against his side, breathing shallow but steady, his ribs bound tight beneath Jack's jacket. Each rise and fall of the dog's chest was a small, stubborn victory. Maya crouched nearby, pale and exhausted, her dark hair plastered to her face with sweat and melted snow, her eyes fixed on the slope below. None of them spoke. The storm had finally spent itself, leaving behind a silence that felt almost sacred. Jack scanned the ridgeline one last time through narrowed eyes. The sniper never came again. He knew what that meant. Professionals didn't waste bullets. They waited for confirmation, and confirmation, Jack realized, would never come. Somewhere far beyond the mountains, the data had landed. The truth was already moving, faster than any man with a rifle could stop. A distant sound cut through the quiet. At first, Jack thought it was the wind returning, but then it came again, rhythmic and mechanical. An engine. He closed his eyes briefly and let out a breath he'd been holding for hours. "That's not them," he said hoarsely. Maya frowned. "How do you know?" Jack tilted his head, listening. Too loud, too official. The sound grew clearer, joined by another, then another, echoing up the valley. Tires on snow, radios, voices. Duke stirred, letting out a weak huff, his tail giving a single tired thump against Jack's leg. Jack smiled despite himself and scratched behind the dog's ear. "You hear that, boy?" Minutes later, figures appeared at the base of the ridge, men in heavy winter gear, moving carefully but without fear, their posture open, not predatory. Red and blue lights flashed through the trees below, muted by snow. Jack rose slowly, keeping one hand raised, the other steadying Duke as Maya waved weakly. A tall man broke from the group and approached, his boots crunching loudly in the fresh snow. He was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered with a weathered face and a thick mustache dusted white. His eyes were sharp but kind, the eyes of someone who had seen enough not to jump to conclusions. "Name's Tom Walker," he called out. "County Sheriff, you the one who made the call?" Jack nodded. "Jack Reynolds." The name seemed to register. Walker stopped a few feet away, studying him, then glanced at Duke. "That your dog?" "Partner," Jack replied. Walker's expression softened. "Ambulance is on the way. They'll need to look at both of you." Jack shook his head once. "Dog first." Walker didn't argue. Medics arrived moments later, moving quickly but carefully. They knelt beside Duke, checking his breathing, palpating his ribs with practiced hands. One of them, a woman in her 30s with tired eyes and a calm voice, looked up at Jack. "He's tough," she said. "Lucky." Bullet glanced off, cracked ribs, heavy bruising, but no lung puncture. Jack felt something in his chest finally break loose. He nodded, unable to speak. Maya was helped onto a stretcher next, her strength giving out now that the danger had passed. As they worked, Walker pulled Jack aside. "We found your cabin," he said quietly. "Signs of forced entry. And we found someone tied up in your pantry." Jack didn't react. "He won't be going anywhere," Walker added. "Federal boys are already inbound. Seems you kicked a hornet's nest." Jack glanced toward Maya, then back at the sheriff. "Good," he said simply. By the time the sun fully cleared the ridge, the valley was alive with activity. Snowmobiles ferried equipment, radios crackled with updates. Duke was carefully loaded into a veterinary transport vehicle, Jack riding beside him, one hand resting on the dog's shoulder the entire time. Maya was taken separately, wrapped in blankets, her eyes closing for the first time since Jack had found her by the fence. Hours later, at the small county clinic, Jack sat in a hard plastic chair, his arm in a sling, watching Duke through a glass partition as the dog slept under warming lights. A bandage wrapped his torso, rising and falling steadily. A veterinarian, An older man with silver hair and gentle hands joined Jack. "He'll heal," the man said. "Might slow him down for a while." Jack huffed softly. "He's earned the rest." Maya appeared in the doorway, moving slowly but on her feet. She looked different now, still tired, still hurting, but lighter somehow. "They told me what you did," she said quietly. Jack didn't look up. "You brought trouble to my door." Maya nodded. "I know." She hesitated, then added, "I'd do it again." Jack finally met her eyes. There was no anger there now, only a deep, familiar weariness. "So would I," he said. Outside, the storm clouds broke apart completely, revealing a sky washed clean and bright. The world felt new in a way Jack hadn't felt in years. Days later, Jack returned to the cabin. The power was back, the fence repaired. The valley lay quiet beneath fresh snow, peaceful once more. Duke limped beside him, ribs still tender but spirit unbroken, his ears high, his gaze alert but no longer tense. They stood on the porch together, watching the sun dip behind the trees. Jack rested a hand on Duke's broad head, feeling the steady warmth there. The storm had tried to take everything. It had failed. Jack went inside, leaving the door open behind him, the sound of wind replaced by something far gentler. Silence. The kind that meant home. Not every miracle arrives with noise or spectacle. Some unfold in silence, woven into moments of choice, sacrifice, and unwavering loyalty. In this story, when fear closed in and the storm erased every easy path, help did not come from strength alone, but from trust, from conscience, and from a presence that felt greater than coincidence. Many of us reach points in life where we question whether anyone is watching, whether our pain has meaning, or whether doing the right thing still matters. And yet, again and again, life shows us that grace often appears through ordinary acts carried out with extraordinary resolve. Perhaps that is how God works most often, through people who refuse to turn away, through courage that holds steady, and through love that steps forward, even when it costs something. This is not just a story about survival. It is a reminder that our lives, too, are guided by moments that can redirect everything if we choose faith over fear. If this message resonated with you, consider passing it on to someone who may need strength today. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to this channel so you can continue walking with us through stories that restore hope, purpose, and the will to keep going. Thank you so much for watching.